I can't believe I'm talking about this fight. What's going on, fight fans? On this channel, we break down things that are happening in the world of MMA and combat sports. My name's Drew, and today I want to talk a little bit about UFC 225, which is happening on June 9th in Chicago. I'm not sure of the name of the arena, but that doesn't really matter about for the purposes of this video. Yeah, you could probably tell from the beginning of this, I'm not super jazzed to talk about this fight, but I want to talk about CM Punk versus Mike Jackson. It's a popular fight. It's one that people are interested in. It's one that the media is paying attention to, and it's one that a lot of fans are interested in, or at least a lot of people are interested in. I say fans because who knows what the crossover audience is from WWE, but if you're not familiar with what the big deal is with this fight, it's that CM Punk, whose real name is Phil Brooks, is a former WWE wrestler, and he apparently was a really big deal back then. And he crossed over to UFC about 2 years ago, and he had one fight against Mickey Gall, and he lost that fight, and he's determined to go at it again, and the UFC is giving him another chance, and on June 9th, he's going to fight against Mike Jackson. Now, Mike Jackson had also previously fought in the UFC in order to try and get that fight against CM Punk. He fought Mickey Gall. He lost that fight, which is why Mickey went on to fight CM Punk, and now they're giving it to Mike anyway. And so I do want to talk about this fight, like I said, because it's getting attention, and I know there are a lot of wrestling fans out there. You might be discovering this channel just because of the connection to CM Punk, and so you can say I'm doing it for the clicks, but you're probably right, to be 100% honest with you. So I want to get it right off the bat and just say this up front that I'm not a wrestling fan. I'm really not a wrestling fan. I was as a kid. I used to like watching it as a young kid, but I'm not anymore. And so I actually didn't know who CM Punk was coming out of wrestling. And I also wanted to say at the beginning of this video is that neither of these guys should be in the UFC. Just to get that out of the way. In his first fight, CM Punk's first fight, there were hundreds or thousands of videos talking about him being in the UFC, and I didn't make videos back then, so I won't talk about it that much, but I just wanted to put that out as a disclaimer that I don't not that anybody cares if I endorse this or not, but I sort of don't endorse this fight as an MMA fan or purist or whatever you want to call it. I don't think that either of these guys should be in the UFC, but I also understand why this fight is happening. Obviously, the UFC was bought out a little while ago by WME, and they bought it for $4 billion, and they have a debt to pay. And if you listen to Luke Thomas and some other people, they'll tell you exactly how much that debt is and a whole bunch of information on that debt. And that's why we have fights like this, because they need to protect their investment, and the easiest way for them to make money is to have a CM Punk fight in his hometown of Chicago, and that's why we're having this. It makes zero sense to the sport, and I think everybody can recognize that neither of these guys should be in the UFC. You have Nick Newell, who has been getting attention this past week, who is an accomplished fighter, and he has to go on the Dana White Contender Series just to get a shot to come into the UFC. And both CM Punk and Mike Jackson are able to just walk right in there. And this shouldn't happen at the highest level of the sport. So without spending too much time on it, because you can listen to a whole bunch of other people talk about CM Punk's entry into the UFC. Brendan Schaub talks about this a lot. He just simply shouldn't be in there. He should be taking amateur fights, or if he's not interested in amateur fights because of his star power, he should be doing it in lower level leagues where he can get some attention. Like Brock Lesnar, his first fight wasn't in the UFC. He fought in Japan. Dave Bautista, another wrestler, fought some lower level fight cards, and that's the avenue to get to the UFC. And so the poor guy, CM Punk, he's super rich. I shouldn't say the poor guy. He used his star power to get into the UFC, but he's doing his learning that most people would do as an amateur in front of everybody. He's doing all of his training, all of that stuff that most people figure out before they get to the UFC, all those losses, all those bad positions. He's doing that right in front of our eyes. And so I feel for him a little bit, but I also don't, because he shouldn't be in the UFC. This fight shouldn't be happening. But anyway, breaking down this fight is kind of hard because we don't have a lot of information on either of these guys. Like I just said, CM Punk doesn't have any amateur fights. There's a lot of tape for us. There's nothing really to watch. And so this can be a little bit hard. Now, Mike Jackson, and I'm going to talk about this when I talk about his keys to victory, does have some other combat sports experience, which I think will play a pretty big factor into this fight. If you pull up his Sheerdog Fight Finder, which is usually a spot you can go to just pull up people's records, including some of their amateur fights, it says that he has one loss, but that's not true. It's not accurate. I know he has at least one amateur win in MMA, referring to Mike Jackson. So it's really hard to just go on the internet and find any information about either of these guys in relations to their MMA record. You see a lot of interviews with CM Punk, but as far as his background in combat sports and jiu-jitsu, you don't really see that much information. The other thing that's really worth pointing out, and that's a really important thing to talk about in this fight, is that Mike Jackson, outside of his one loss in the UFC, apparently has a 4-0 record as a boxer, with 3 fights coming as a KO, knockout, and one of those fights being a TKO. So he's 4-0 as a boxer, and that's combat sports experience. That's experience the high pressure of a fight under the bright lights, performing, and that's an important factor. It's important experience that I just don't believe CM Punk has coming into this fight. Now, there's something always to be said about the shine of the bright lights, right? The millions of people are going to be watching, and the adrenaline that comes along with that, and your heart pounding, and the nerves around fighting on pay-per-view for millions of people to watch. I don't want to say that CM Punk's done that because it wasn't a fight. It's not like he fought in front of millions of fans, but he has no nervousness about being in front of an audience, or at least I don't assume he does. I'm not a fan of his, so I don't know if in more intimate interviews he said that he still gets nervous. But I mean, the guy spoke on using microphones in front of massive crowds in the WWE and big pay-per-view star, and so he doesn't have the nerves associated with the star power. So that's an advantage to him in that Mike Jackson has only fought once in the UFC, didn't have a great showing, and maybe that still creates some nerves in him. But when it comes to actual experience fighting under that attention, that's a different story. And I don't believe, while CM Punk has experience entertaining and performing in front of people, he doesn't have experience really fighting in front of a lot of people. So that's important. That's an important thing to know, is that Mike Jackson, 4-0 boxer, he had if you pull up a record, I think it's on Tapology.com, he does have a Muay Thai fight listed on there. He lost that fight, but we can assume that he's had a number of amateur Muay Thai fights or kickboxing fights as well, and it's just really hard to pull up the information on there. In short, Mike Jackson is a far more experienced martial artist than CM Punk, and I know that that's going to be a hard pill to swallow for a lot of CM Punk fans. There's this funny interview with CM Punk and Michael Landsberg in TSN here in Canada, where the host asked him if he's ever been punched in the face before. And CM Punk got really upset by that. He's like, "Are you really asking me if I've ever been punched in the face?" And I remember thinking, if I'm the host, like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm asking you. And I guess for wrestling fans and for wrestlers, like, they know that sometimes things get a little out of hand and people lay in punches, I guess. I don't really know. I kind of hear Ariel Helwani talk about it sometimes, I guess. But in reality, he's never, no one's really thrown that kind of strike with intention to KO him outside of his fights in the gym and his fight with Mickey Gall. So anyway, Mike Jackson is the far more experienced martial artist in this regard. So let's get into the keys for victory in regards to each fighter. For Mike Jackson, simple key to victory is to use that boxing experience that he has, and specifically use the footwork that comes along with that. One of the things that you notice in a lot of lower level fights, as people are earlier in their experience as a fighter, is that they don't have necessarily the greatest footwork. I feel like footwork is something that is developed later as far as a skill set goes. And so chances are that Mike Jackson has better footwork than CM Punk. I don't feel like that's a crazy outlandish statement to make. In boxing, footwork is very important, and it's important in mixed martial arts as well. But as a result and a consequence of being a boxer, Mike Jackson probably has better developed footwork. So I think if he can use that boxing and use that footwork to control his position in the octagon, that'll really go a long way for Mike Jackson. I think he needs to avoid the cage as much as possible, because I believe that CM Punk is going to be looking for takedowns. I think he would have a better fight if he did it on the ground. And so I think CM Punk's going to look for takedowns, and the cage is just sort of a bad place for that. And considering where CM Punk is training at and the training partners he's using, he's got a lot more experience fighting for a takedown against a cage than I believe Mike Jackson will have as far as defending a takedown against the cage. And you're going to hear me use the term "I believe" a lot in this video, because I have no idea. Like, this is just me spitballing thoughts, because we just don't have the information on these guys. Anyway, lastly, the last key to victory for Mike Jackson is to not play the jiu-jitsu game with him. I don't know what kind of jiu-jitsu and wrestling and grappling experience that Mike Jackson has, but I am willing to bet that CM Punk has better grappling experience than him. And so whatever skills in grappling that Mike Jackson has, he should use to stand back up. And we see that sometimes with MMA fighters when they enter jiu-jitsu competitions, is that they're really good at whatever position they're in, using the butterfly guard or using their ability to sort of shrimp, get on one side and stand back up really well. And so if Mike Jackson has some competency on the ground, he should use that to stand back up if he's taken down, because I think he'll have a fairly significant advantage in the striking department. And then for CM Punk, which is probably what most of you are here to listen about, the keys for victory are quite simple. I think he needs to wrestle Mike Jackson. His training partners in the wrestling game are absolute monsters. Ben Askren, Tyron Woodley. He's training out of Rufus Sport in Wisconsin, or at least he was for the last fight. I don't know if he still is there, but I would imagine that he is. And that is a high-level MMA gym with two of the best wrestlers in the game today, and Ben Askren, one of the best wrestlers we've ever seen in mixed martial arts. So I'm sure they've trained together. I'm sure he's learned a little bit about wrestling, and so I think that he should use that wrestling to get this fight to the ground. We also know that he's friends with and has trained with Henry Gracie for a long time. And I think CM Punk said that he's forever a white belt, and I kind of identify with that as a guy that trains but doesn't really expect to see a lot of I'm not going to make a career out of it, let's say. And so he says he's a forever white belt, but he's been training jiu-jitsu for a long time. So I'm certain that he has developed a decent submission game. And so if he can get this fight to the ground using wrestling and play the top game, that would be great. I don't think it's wise for him to play off of his back, or try and grapple off of his back. Again, if he gets on his back, I think he should try and use those skills to stand up. But I do still think he has an advantage in that department. So for CM Punk to try and grapple Mike Jackson would be a really good idea. I think he needs to listen to his coaches and stick to the game plan. I mean, like I just said, he has some of the best coaches in mixed martial arts. And so I don't know who his specific cornermen will be as far as trainers from Rufus Sport, but if Duke Rufus is there developing a game plan, he is one of the best coaches in mixed martial arts, so he should really listen to those guys, whether it's in the octagon when they're shouting instruction at him or beforehand and they're telling him how to fight. It's well within his best interest to listen to them, because they have years and years of experience and they'll help him win this fight. And lastly, I just think that CM Punk basically just needs to show some heart, and if he does that, in my opinion, it's a moral victory and he wins this fight. I mean, this is a celebrity with some money who wanted to do this kind of like a bucket list item, and I get that. And at this point, I'm kind of pulling for the guy. The fact that he really wanted to do this again, like Robin Black talked about this in his breakdown for this fight. You should absolutely go watch that. If you're not watching Robin Black, you should not watch my videos. Go listen to him, because his breakdowns are a lot better than mine. He actually knows what he's talking about, and he talked about the fact that CM Punk is doing what martial artists do. You go, you fail, you learn, you try again to get better. And who can admire that? I think we have. Part of me is pulling for this guy to actually do well, because he's being determined to meet this goal and objective. And I want to take a bucket list MMA fight one day. I think CM Punk's a little bit older than I am, but I get it. I get what he wants to do here, and I somewhat admire it. Does it bother me as an MMA fan that he's doing it in the UFC? Absolutely. But if he can show some heart here, if he can grit out a tough decision, or if he can just show that he has what it takes to be a mixed martial artist and really take the punishment and really fight through difficult positions and show some serious heart in this fight, that's a win. So whether or not he wins the decision, whether or not he gets the victory on paper, if he can show some heart in this fight, I think this is a win for CM Punk. And so that's all I have here, is just show the heart that I think he has. He's been training after that loss. A lot of guys would have quit. He's been driving to Wisconsin to train, and a lot of guys would have said, screw this, I'm rich, I don't need this, I gave it a shot, it didn't work out. But CM Punk was determined to see this through, and he's sticking it out and taking another fight. And I have to admire that. So if he can show that same kind of heart in the octagon on June 9th, then I think he wins regardless of what the actual outcome is of the fight. And so if I have to make a prediction, which I do because I title these videos prediction videos, obviously MMA is so volatile, so these predictions can go either way. But I think that this fight ends by submission. And the reason is because I've watched a lot of I've gone to a lot of like amateur MMA events and local MMA events. They're really fun. And what you often see in these, and I actually think that we saw it on Bellator this past Saturday night it was the Dylan Danis card. I'm not talking, what I'm about to say isn't specifically talking about Dylan Danis, but what you see sometimes in low-level MMA is a lot of submissions and first-round submissions or first-round finishes in low-level MMA. Well, why is that? Probably because in the lower levels, you haven't developed the defensive part of mixed martial arts as much as you've developed either the balls to just get in there or the offensive part of fighting. And so you see a lot of people get submitted. You see some TKOs. You don't see a lot of like flat out knockouts, but you do see some ground and pound TKOs, and you see a lot of submissions. And so I think, and like I said, we actually saw that in Bellator, and it had me questioning this past Saturday just the level. How high is Bellator? I'm not sure. I'll make a video on that one day. But I expect that because this is lower level MMA, make no mistakes about it, both of these guys are 0-1 coming into the octagon. This is the worst fight that's ever taken place in the UFC. Whether it's James Toney, whether it's CM Punk's first fight, both these guys are 0-1 in mixed martial arts, and they're fighting on the main card of the UFC. I mean, it's ridiculous how bad this fight is, but I do think it ends in submission because it's low-level MMA, and I think that's my baseline, that this fight ends in submission. And if I think that that's true, the most likely outcome is that CM Punk is the one to do that, given his jiu-jitsu experience. And I'll even go out even further on a limb and say that he wins by rear naked choke, because that's one of the easier submissions to land if he's able to get to the back, which I know is quite the task. I'm not trying to undermine how difficult that can be, but it's not like trying to pull off an omoplata or even an armbar, which can be pretty technical sometimes in a scramble. If he can get his back, it's fairly simple-ish to land a rear naked choke. I'm sure some of you are going to thumbs down this video just because of that statement, but I think that he can probably get a rear naked choke. So I think that this fight ends in submission in the first or second round, and I think CM Punk gets the victory he wants. And for the love of everything MMA, please never fight in the UFC ever again. Ride off into the sunset with your victory, 1-1, and just don't fight in the UFC again. I don't want to see that. So for the question of the day, do you care about this fight? Do you care about this fight at all? I'm on the fence. I will watch it. I'll pay for it because I'm a fan of the sport, but I'm not sure that I care. Do you care about this fight? Were you a fan of CM Punk in the WWE, and are you coming over to watch the UFC or this video specifically because you were his fan as a wrestler, or and you followed him to the UFC? I'd love to know your answer to that question. If you want to leave the answer in the comment section, I would really appreciate it. Also, really quickly, before I end this video, I wanted to say that I'm going to be joining the guys at the Bar 89 podcast on May 24th to talk about Ronda Rousey and her new career in the WWE. They asked me to call in as a guy that is a fan of MMA to talk about her new career, so I'm really excited to join them. Again, that's the Bar 89 podcast. You can see them at www.thebar89 www.bar89.ca. I think you can also find them on iTunes and Google Music and SoundCloud. And so check out their website. Great group of guys. I've listened to their podcast a number of times. Good stuff. And so at the end of May, check that out, and you can listen to me talk about Ronda Rousey on their show and see how she's doing in the WWE. Thanks. I really appreciate you guys watching these videos. I know this one went really long. I'm a long-winded person. I apologize if you wanted to get in and out for that prediction. As always, fight the good fight, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to watch this content. I'm just a fan with an opinion and a camera, but I love the sport of MMA. So if you want to see some more videos, you can take a look here on the right of this screen. And other than that, I will catch you in the next video.